right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Need Some Introduction. Today, we will be reviewing the fourth episode of 9 Perfect Strangers on FX on Hulu. Available only on Hulu, I believe. I don't know how this is going to be available on FX in the future, but don't know how that all works, but it's, I think, exclusively available on Hulu currently. We had pretty good response from the first episode, our first recap episode, so hopefully you hang in there and watch along with us. I have a lot of things to say about this episode. I really liked it, but I also have my concerns, and we'll get into all of that in a minute. I also want to announce that just starting this week, once again on FX, if you want to watch along with us, we will be starting to recap only Murders in the Building. And I teased this in the last episode. I think this will be interesting. Sona's here with me.
Hi.
And I think it's going to be interesting because, first of all, it takes place in Manhattan.
Love
and where Sona lives. And I'm sure we can, Sona will do a lot of spotting locations, which she likes to do.
I also like to look for myself in the background when it's someplace I've been before.
And the second reason I'm excited about it is that it is a very potentially funny, and I shouldn't say just potentially, the reviews have come in now because the show is about to come out, and the reviews have been very, very positive. And it is Steve Martin and Martin Short playing two kind of washed up has-been minor celebrities, basically looking for something to do late in their lifetimes. And what happens is they befriend Selena Gomez, of all people, who supposedly steals the whole show. That's what the early reviews are saying.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah. And here's the most interesting part about it. What happens is someone gets murdered in the building, or they suspect it's a murder, and they start a podcast to investigate this potential murder in their building. During the course of things, they may potentially become the next target of this supposed killer. So that's the basic premise. It's a comedy, but the reviews have been saying that it is very funny and very scary at times too. So I think that's a perfect combination for a summer show to watch.
I'm excited.
The only tricky thing of this, by the way, Sona, is just like this show, they are dropping 3 episodes on the first day.
Oh, no. I didn't know that.
So I was originally planning that we probably would have an episode where we cover 9 Perfect Strangers and this comedy, right? Which can't be like that dense, I would assume. So we kind of have one episode that kind of covers both things. And that was my original plan. But if we're going to do 3 episodes and 1 episode of 9 Perfect Strangers, I don't know how we're going to do all that. We'll have to see how dense those first 3 episodes are. But I think that's going to be tough. But anyway, all that is to say, listeners, that stay tuned. We'll figure it out once we put the episodes together and see how I don't want to do a 3.5-hour episode. It's basically my.
I'm going to have to go back to taking notes. I haven't taken notes since Harvey's Town, but I'm going to have to go back to taking notes. It's too much.
Especially if we're recapping 2 shows at once, right? We're definitely going to have to do that. Oh, and the last thing is I will definitely, and I believe Sona will participate in this as well, as long as she catches up by then, right around the time that this show will be wrapping up in a few weeks. And then Only Murders in the Building is a longer series. It'll be lasting through mid-October, I believe. And by then, Succession will be back. And I definitely plan to be watching Succession week to week and on HBO. And I hope everybody's is excited for that, because I am very, very excited for that return. So that the last season is great. The first season was great. The second season was even more impressive. And I'm very, very excited for season 3. So that's coming too, just a couple months away. And these shows will tide us over until then. So I hope to you guys all stick around for all of that. It'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so for this episode of 9 Perfect Strangers, I am going to pull up the title because I forgot to do that earlier.
Yeah, I was thinking about how we haven't really discussed titles on this one the way we have previously for the other recaps.
Maybe we could do that right now, actually, since I have it here in front of me. So the first episode was called Random Acts of Mayhem. I don't know if that thematically tied into the episode as we saw it.
I hate it when I feel like I'm not smart enough to understand why the title is what it is.
Well, I think this is, if I'm going to interpret this at all, it's like, random acts of kindness, right? So
Obviously.
Random acts of mayhem. I think this is just kind of like, I think it's just a joke, right? It's just like, these people are, doing random harm to each other rather than
I
kindness,
guess,
right?
like one very inside lawyer type joke is that mayhem technically means that somebody loses an appendage. And so it's always interesting, like when someone uses mayhem to just mean general chaos, because, unless someone actually lost an appendage, it's not mayhem.
You can't call it mayhem. That is very interesting, by the way. I really like the fact that's a legal term, because that makes me think about it, like probably as you do, but it makes me think about that terminology in a completely different way. Episode 2, once again, I don't think you're going to get much out of this. It's called The Critical Path. which once again, the critical path,
Okay.
usually critical path is the path that is required, right? Like, you can kind of diverge slightly, but you have the critical path, which is the path that gets you to your, is required to get to your destination.
Yes.
So I don't think the show has defined that yet. So I think that's just
Mhm.
kind of, once again, episode 3. I don't think this is going to help you because it's called Earth Day, and it's not the day that they bury themselves. So I don't know why this. So I can't think of
It is
anything.
the day though that they have to live off the land.
Oh
So
yeah, that's right. So I think that was
at least I could do something with that one. Yeah.
that's actually true. I think they may have called it Earth Day, so that is actually true. Okay, so this episode, once again, not that useful, is called Brave New World. I mean, it only means the fact that, theoretically, like now that the cat is out of the bag, I guess this is the Brave New World for the group. But I don't think this is anything thematically important here. But like I teased earlier, I actually really like this episode a lot.
I do too.
It's very funny that everything we talked about in the first episode kind of came to fruition here in many different ways. One of them was specifically, first of all the things we kind of talked about, like potentially having these kind of therapeutic retreats. We talked about sweat lodges. We get a sweat lodge here. We talked about, microdosing with, I was mentioning LSD, but they're using psilocybin, but, similar concept, right? I even mentioned primal screaming and stuff, and we have a little bit of primal screaming in this episode. But and another thing,
and also like the issues of consent, right? It's one thing to try and accomplish the ends through some sort of substance, but then you can't do that without asking people first.
Yeah, exactly. And that was like the whole, when I was editing the episode last week, that's like the whole last 15 minutes of it is me and you going back and forth about the whole idea of like, okay, I understand this conceptually, but you need to have consent. And then of course, like the first 15 minutes of this episode is the same conversation we had last week.
Yes.
Because everybody on the show is like, okay, I'm on board with this, but we need to have consent, right?
So they got on board fast. So that was just like what's happening.
I'm a little critical of how quickly they came on board. I think that it's a little too convenient the way some people react. But in some cases, and this is something I like about the episode, the couple, Napoleon and Heather, for example, they have such a tender moment, and I guess we'll get into it in more detail in just a minute.
Yeah.
But that's totally believable, right? And I really liked those character moments where you can say like, oh, this person is totally on board with this because it's such a revelation for them, as opposed to some people that are just like, I'm sticking it out. Like, what else do I got to do? I'm like, this doesn't seem like quite as strong a rationale to stick around.
And also very believable to me was Jessica's reaction.
Yes.
Well, why is everybody else getting drugs and I'm not? Which absolutely would have been my reaction as well.
I literally
shorted. This is not equitable.
I literally wrote it down, that I just put down FOMO, which is like, obviously just totally in her character, with Instagramming and everything. And but I thought it was also funny that it's almost like, in a way, it's like, oh, like the intention is to dose them, but it's like, oh, we don't have to dose them because as soon as they find out everybody else is getting dosed, they're going to want to get dosed too. So it's like, we don't need to trick them. We don't need to trick them into it. They'll request it. Oh, and the last thing that kind of ties into our conversation last week is exactly what I was talking about, kind of being and it almost feels, you can almost feel it in the production, something once again about this being a COVID friendly production. And I was talking about how, well, if you just have like kind of like scenes where you just have pairs of people confronting each other, then it makes production pretty easy because you can keep the any kind of contamination pretty low. And we have an episode where it's basically like over and over and over again, it's like these two people in the room together, these two people in the room together, these two people in the room together. It's like pretty much all we see the whole entire time. It's almost so calculated that you start feeling it a little bit. You're like, oh, it's weird that there's never more than 3 people in the room together at any time. Which, by the way, White Lotus also had, going just to tie that back, White Lotus also had that. I had that experience also there, where oftentimes it's just like 2 or 3 people in a room together ever. That's all you get, unless you're outside, and then you have 2 people close to each other, and everybody else is kind of like in the background.
Honestly, the more I think about White Lotus, the less I like it. I got to be honest with you, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, we'll have to have that conversation at some point in the future. But now to get into this episode proper.
I thought we picked up with like, well, are you medicating us?
Yeah, so we pick up right from the end where people are saying like, are you on board with this? And actually, I think the first scene might be the first, not the first scene maybe, but the first like important interaction might be between Heather and Napoleon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where he's like kind of saying,
where he's like, we got to get out of here.
Yeah, right? We need to like pack up and get out of here. Exactly. Because I think that's still the night of. So unlike, and the blender might come, usually comes like at the beginning of the episode. I think that might come a little later because I think we still see the kind of the repercussions of the night of before we actually get into the next morning. And I actually thought, what did you think of this scene? I thought this was a really sweet scene between the two of them.
I thought so too. I mean, you can see how much they're struggling with in their relationship and that they both want to make it work. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I like these characters.
I really liked it just because I thought it was very sweet. Like, it wasn't kind of over the top sex scenes or something. It was just kind of like them reconnecting in a very tender way. And I thought that was very sweet. And so, yeah, I really liked that scene. And that was the first of many really good scenes.
You emerged alone yourself? Saying grace?
It was the drugs.
Honey.
What?
There was nothing you could have done.
I literally just wrote down like, oh, good performance. Oh, good performance.
Yeah.
Like over and over and over again. And I'll get into
them
in specifics.
Although I will say also very early in this episode, there was a Masha scene, which I've almost like deleted from my memory altogether. She was in a parking garage.
Oh, yes.
She's on the phone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like Nicole Kidman is supposed to be one of the big pulls here, but I could not be less interested.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think and that's going to be my qualm, I think later on with my concerns, is I think that's going to become a bigger part of the story as we go forward. And like you mentioned, I think that you're absolutely right. And I think that might be, once again, even revising my original statement, that might actually be the first scene of the show. And once again, I could care less.
I couldn't remember if it was the very first or not, but right. She's in a parking garage. She seems to be talking to a boyfriend or some sort of romantic interest.
Right.
Right. And then someone's approaching behind her. And honestly, I have deleted from my memory what else happens in that scene.
I don't think we hear the gunshot, but I do believe that is a reference to that scene where she,
that's what it looks like.
Oh, we do. Yeah. No, we do hear the gunshot because then we see that moment again where she, in her flashbacks, after the being shot, she has visions of herself as a child. So there's like that scene. I think we hear the gunshot go off, and then we actually see her like on a swing, right? Or like we see the point of view of somebody on a swing. And we had also seen like in the original flashback, we saw her like on a bicycle, like a young girl with blonde hair on a bicycle. So I think that, so she kind of reconnected with her childhood or something. I mean, I think that's what's being represented there. Visually, I don't mind the motif. I think it's actually pretty, but like you said, character wise, I don't care. And I think this whole thing is an invention that's not in the book. So it seems very,
which is interesting to know. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have that really nice scene between them. Then I think there's breakfast, and then they have activities for the day. We find out that it is Carmel's one-on-one scene with Masha. And we find out, like you mentioned, that at breakfast the next day, like everybody makes jokes about it. They're like, oh, so are we getting drugged? And they're like, well, now you know it. And, Melissa McCarthy, Frances is like, bottom up, So she also makes a joke, right? That she goes, I'm going to go get my, this is the night of, by the way. This is like right at the beginning. That the night of, she says, I'm going to go to my car and get the vodka that I stashed away in there.
Right,
and she's like, and you're not allowed to say anything to me anymore.
Yes. And they all just look at her like, yeah, we can't stop you.
They're like, yeah, you got a point. And Masha does explain that they are being microdosed, right, with psilocybin, right? So she goes into detail about that, and that's what that leads to the whole like conversations we see amongst the couples of. And actually, I guess we see Masha also discussing this with the staff, right, where the staff is saying, and I don't remember exactly where this happens, but the behind the scenes stuff is kind of like just there to connect dots. So I don't think it really matters where it is in the episode. But yeah, we do see that there is some conflict between the staff and Masha as far as, is there really consent or not? Which is kind of weird because they're like saying that, they shouldn't know. And it's like, well, have you guys done this before? Like at some point they have to know, right? They have to figure it out, right? So maybe it's just when they're further along so they don't.
Right, because remember there was that thing about we're switching to protocol 2 and it's too early, and like, so I guess maybe it ties into that.
Right. I guess the idea is, not that we have clarification on this yet, but I guess the way they do this is that they're dosing them secretly, and then slowly they're microdosing them. So then over time they start to like loosen up, they start to have better experiences, and then they tell them, hey, by the way, this is what's been happening. And I guess if your results are good, you don't really question it, as opposed to, you get sprung on you day 2. Maybe it's a little early for all that. But anyway, they go along with it. So we figure out a little bit more from their conversations as to like what their process is and how this is supposed to work out. And then I think we have the scene where we have Lars and Zoe in a sweat lodge together. Of all the scenes in the show, I think this is the worst, my opinion, because I felt like, we get a little bit of Lars backstory. Oh, we do find out that Lars is a journalist, right? Which I
That's
suspected
right.
for a while. So we did find that out.
Yes.
Once, by the way, not a journalist in the book, but a journalist here for some reason.
Okay.
He's a lawyer in the book. He's just like a powerful, he's a powerful, according to Kim, he's a powerful lawyer who is addicted to going to spas. That's his thing.
Is he gay in the book?
I think so. I believe so.
Okay. Because one of the things I like about the dynamic that they've set up here, just as a woman who's lived in the world, I like it that they, started out by establishing that he's gay. So you don't have to worry that he's like the older guy checking out the young girl and like there's something twisted. Yep. I think it keeps the relationship much more pure. Yep. If I didn't know that, I'd be like, oh, any minute now he's going to do something inappropriate with this 20-year-old girl.
You know what? I hadn't thought about that, but I actually totally agree. I think that you're right, that my experience of their relationship is like a friendship developing. And you're absolutely correct. If I was watching this in any other context and he was, just this older guy who was hanging out with this 20-year-old, I would be thinking the whole time, like he's some kind of like creep, right?
Right. Like he's establishing her trust and he's, she's going to think he's such a good friend. And then he's going to find his moment to seize and do something inappropriate.
Yeah. He's grooming her. Speaking of something else we might talk about later today. But at the same time, I didn't love this scene because I kind of wanted to see this conversation, right? That we talked about, like, once again, just last week, how tough this must be as a twin. Like, wow, like this is like really, and I feel like they kind of didn't nail it here. I specifically call it out because I felt almost every other scene this episode really hit me emotionally. And this one felt very perfunctory. It's like, such a big topic and to kind of just brush it off. And then when she's just like, oh, and what's your story? And he's just like, oh, I'm gay and I'm Catholic, so I'm guilty. I feel guilt about that. So I'm like, okay, well, that was kind of perfunctory too, right? So, and
I get what you're saying there. I do like this relationship between them, but I understand your point about this particular scene.
Only because I feel the bar is very high because we follow this scene up with the one-on-one between Masha and Regina Hall. And I literally wrote down, Regina Hall is killing it.
Yes.
This scene was incredible. Like, wow. And not only was she so good in it, one of the things I really like about Nicole Kidman, or used to like her, about her as a performer, is I think that she is so empathetic, so you could just like look at her face and she doesn't even need to speak. And that's the kind of acting I really like. And to that point, I'm not really into this performance by her, not really into her character.
Yeah.
But she is great in this scene with Regina Hall because Regina Hall is giving her so much and all she has to do is react. And the two of them are great together. And that's like what two performers can really, do to help each other out. And anyway, this is a great scene.
Yeah. You can really see how much pain Carmel is in. Like she dedicated what some would say, I'm not necessarily going to agree, the best years of her life to, this relationship and raising her kids. And where has it all gotten her, right? The husband is with some younger woman and the kids adore her and she's forgotten in a way. And that is painful. And that's a very real thing that happens to so many women.
Yeah. First of all, I feel like it's something that's completely relatable to I believe, to a lot of women. And second of all, I also thought it was really, her performance is so heartbreaking because she's not even saying, we've seen her like kind of fly off the handle. So you could picture her being like some of the kind of crazy woman scorned. You could easily paint her that way if you wanted to. And instead she's like saying the new woman that he's with is young and pretty. And that's why, she has this insecurity about herself. But at the same time, she goes, she's wonderful. And the kids love her, right?
My husband, he left me for a younger, prettier thing. My kids love her. We call her by her first name, Lillian. And she's a sweet woman with a sweet name. They're in Italy right now, vacationing together. Can I show you something? Yes. Can you see that? Oh. It's a little scar. He bit me. But it was an act of passion. Back when he couldn't get enough of me. And I fondle this scar almost every night.
So she feels like you said, forgotten, like she dedicated her life to raising this family, and the family just walked away from her. And it's not even they walked away from her because they're evil people. They just rather be somewhere else. And that leaves her completely like unmoored. Right. And it's really, I mean, it's very relatable, and she sells it like, holy cow, she sells it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And then we have another knockout scene. I got to tell you, when we then go, this could be a terrible garbage scene. I got to tell you that when we see them with the katana, right, the wooden, the fake sword, and the samurai suit, and they're back inside that circular room, and they're basically going for their primal scream, or what, I don't even know what this technique is. This is not primal scream. This is I forget what this is. It's where you like beat up a pillow, or you attack some kind of I forget what it's called.
I mean, we've seen so many different versions of this in different types of television and movies throughout the years, right? Sometimes in a comedy context, sometimes in a drama context, but it's something that it regularly comes up, which, like, strangely, in all my years on this world, I've never found myself in a circumstance
exactly
where I've had the opportunity to do this. Maybe I would love it, but it comes up a lot in media.
Yeah, so basically what we're describing is, for anybody who's not watching this, but I don't know why you'd be listening to this if you haven't watched the show, but it's the scene where they basically have a straw man, which is actually like a samurai suit for some reason. I don't know why, just aesthetics, I guess. It's like an empty suit, and then you have they're holding like a katana, like a samurai sword, but made out of wood, that you would use when you were sparring. And basically you need to attack this suit, right? You get to like envision whatever you want in there. And the first person who goes up is Frances. And Melissa McCarthy, once again, I such admire her when she's not playing her generic screaming, angry white lady shtick. And she basically gets to show you all the pain underneath that. And she envisions this guy who romance scammed her. Ben Falcone's the actor, her real life husband.
She literally sees his face under the
inside.
mask.
Yeah, exactly. And she starts to at first strike it lightly, and then eventually she starts striking it more forcefully. But the whole time she's talking to it, and she's like saying, I thought, I was researching schools. I thought I was going to have a family. I loved you. How could you do this to me? And it's like, wow, it is so heartbreaking. Like I got like choked up watching her. It was really, and it's not something I do normally, by the way. And it's like, I really felt for her. She was terrific in this scene. Like,
I went and checked out schools for Ari. Do you know that? I went to PTA meetings, and I sat with all those parents, and I talked about my family. I wanted it all set up when you arrived, but you never arrived, and you're never gonna arrive. You said we'd raise Ari together, and you kept saying to me over and over I was gonna be a mom. And you took that from me, and I can't get it back. You took my money, you took my confidence. So
yeah, it was like a very uninhibited performance for the actress and the character, right? Which maybe the drugs play a role in that, but to be so vulnerable in
or the alcohol
in that way, or the hangover, right? But yeah, I mean, to say all of those things out loud yourself, that's some vulnerability, really. So
and you can really see where casting is so smart in some cases, and maybe not great for Nicole Kidman, but great here in the fact, like I mentioned before, Melissa McCarthy has kind of a persona that we expect to see, and it's a similar persona that we see in the character. And then, like you said, her being like that emotionally open as an actress, but then of course the character itself, right? Because those two things are meshing together, and it works really well. Like, I mean, yeah, she does a great job. And then we see Carmel gets her turn, and she goes bonkers. And they really egg her on. They're like reading scripts saying like, you're too fat.
Nicole Kidman opens up that little notebook and
starts reading back
all the most hurtful statements in the world.
But then Delilah as well, right? They both start doing it, right? Although Nicole Kidman is definitely worse about, more heartful about it. And then I'm watching this scene like, man, and I really didn't like the rest of that scene. So I'm like, man, they go for such a really, really strong scene with Melissa McCarthy, and they completely turned me off with the Carmel scene. And I thought it was so off-putting. But then again, it turns off all the characters. So maybe that's correct. So maybe I was getting the appropriate response from it rather than the wrong response from it. Because at that point, everyone starts to say, this place is, effed up. We got to get out of here, right?
Well, I mean, it certainly seemed like a cruel thing to do, right?
Yes.
Where Melissa McCarthy is opening herself and making herself vulnerable that way. They're egging her on here by,
Yeah.
I mean, come on, like she's a better mother than you, I think was one
Yeah.
of the statements. I mean, oh, that would cut your heart open, right?
Right, right. Oh yeah, they're absolutely monsters to her. But and like I said, and it turned me off while I was watching it. It not only turned me off because of what they were doing, but turned me off because of how like ham-fisted the show was being.
Mm-hmm,
But like I said, the cast, the other people
right.
start to say like, we really got to get out of here. Like Napoleon's like, we need to get out of here. Tony's like, we need to get out of here. These people are all crazy, right? And I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe, like I said, maybe my reaction of being really turned off was the correct reaction because the characters themselves seem to be wanting to get out of there too. So.
Oh yeah, so I remember that other scene wrong where Napoleon's saying we got to get out of here. I was thinking it was after dinner, but maybe it was after this, right? Where they're talking about Zoe's birthday is tomorrow. Do we really want to be here for that?
Right.
And then she comes prancing through going, yep, we're staying here.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
I
Napoleon
was
has the
that in a different spot. Okay.
Yeah, Napoleon's initially at the very beginning of the episode, Napoleon's like, are you okay with this? Is like kind of his initial reaction.
Okay.
And then she's like, and then they have sex, of course. And then he's like, well, maybe I'll stick around.
I'm
and by the
board.
way, he even says something very complimentary in the morning, right? Of course, obviously he's like this the morning after. So he's probably in his like afterglow still. But he is saying like, I don't know what's going on here, but it's working. So
Right.
I'm on board, right? It was kind of like his pep talk during breakfast,
Yes.
right? But now, like you mentioned, him and Tony are probably the most vocal about being like, this place is really effed up. We got to get out of here.
Yeah.
So, and then we get one more really great scene. But yeah, Bobby Cannavale as Tony is saying that they're messing with us. I got to get out of here. Why did she say, you guys all have violence inside of you. You can kill somebody. Could you kill somebody? And she goes, and he tells his backstory about how he got into a bar fight and that, someone recognized him. And this is actually, unfortunately, very common. Like that, just like Bobby Cannavale mentions here, or Tony, the character, that, you see an athlete out in public and you want to make your bones by proving yourself, bragging rights that you got into a fight with the guy. And then, of course, they react like, a normal person probably would. And apparently that's the reason he's here in the first place, right? Because this is kind of part of his treatment, I guess, for his anger management or whatever, that he was supposed to go to a place. But not only did he get into a fight with this guy, which happens all the time, he hit the guy hit the ground, banged his head and died. He, got skull fracture or something, and then eventually died. And so he was not, he didn't have to face any kind of charges for murder or.
Yeah, he says that because there were so many witnesses to the fight, they saw that he didn't start it. And so he was just defending himself. And that the journalist just kind of like buried the story. So it never really took on that PR kind of life of its own that can happen sometimes. So there was a lot that was explained there that I think answered a lot of questions that would come up normally when you hear a story like that.
As convoluted as all that is, Bobby Cannavale's performance, though, is just incredible. He is broken by all this. He just can't get over the fact that he killed, took someone's life.
He had a mother, Francis. He had a father, a wife. He had a little sister. They made him dead.
Is that why you're here?
I don't know why the fuck I'm here, Francis. I'm a drug addict. I got 2 kids that don't talk to me. I got a career that ended in a blink. Why am I here? I got nowhere else to go.
And he just still can't forgive himself. And it is probably part of his addiction problem as well. And another, just, like I said, he just sells it because it's a great performance.
Yeah, I agree. Really.
So 3 amazing scenes in this episode, right? And pretty well written, but I really feel like it's the performers more than anything else that are pulling this off. Yeah, and the only other scene before we get to the end that I forgot to mention, which is kind of a funny scene, but it also has its sad elements to it too, is when we see Jessica run into Yao. He's saying that he's trying to listen to the trees or something, but it seemed like he was doing something specific. But anyway, he's out there and he runs into Jessica, and Jessica basically asks, hey, can we get those too? And like I said, this scene doesn't really stand up compared to some of the other ones, but it does look like there will be some kind of dosing, although they're getting MDMA instead of getting psilocybin. And I don't know if their dose started, I think at dinner time is when it started. So it might even start at the end of this episode. But a couple
Yeah,
things
I'm
about
really
that.
fond of the Jessica character, but like not a big Jessica episode here. Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't that much that she did.
Yep.
I mean, we did see her in bed with her husband kind of, and she's talking about how she wants to get dosed, and he's talking about
Yeah.
like why, and she's like, well, it could be good for people, and that's it. I mean, it's like you said, not a big
Yeah.
episode for her. She talks to Yao, but Yao is also kind of like, meditating in the woods or whatever he's doing, but he also is kind of in a pensive place because he seems to be obviously straining under this relationship problem he's having, right? And we actually see explicitly any questions that they're having a sexual relationship is explicit in this
Sure is.
in this episode. We see what's happening for sure, and then and then get into it a little bit more, and then of course there is a lot of tension.
Yeah, I mean, listen, on the one hand, if you know what you're signing up for and your eyes are open, I guess you should not be feeling resentful and whatever when your husband goes to see his other girlfriend. But as a person who probably could not be in a relationship like that, I get where Delilah was coming from, and I too would make him sleep on the couch.
Yeah, the whole thing is a little strange. I'm not sure I still understand all of that. Delilah is saying to him, where did you go? And he's like, I went for a walk. I need to clear my head, which is a lie.
Yeah, which, okay, also, if you're going to be in
Yes,
this kind of relationship, you shouldn't be
exactly.
lying, right? So, and she knows he's lying. So there's a reason to be angry right there.
That's why I was going to say that I didn't understand the dynamic for that very reason, right? It's like, if you're in this relationship and that's the way it is, even if she's not ecstatic about it, like why lie about it? Like,
Yeah,
like, what's the point?
Adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like she's going to prefer that you lie to her about it. Like,
Right.
I don't, that doesn't seem to be like a good plan on his part.
Agree.
And he's kind of dealing with that when I think, you can read on his face that he's probably dealing with some of this when Jessica runs into him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because she even says it, right? Like, all relationships are complicated, and he's kind of like, you have no idea. try two people at the same time who work together.
Mm-hmm. And one's my boss. Yeah.
Right. And bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of them, at least one is bipolar.
Yes, the other one is bipolar. One's my boss and the other is bipolar.
Right. And I guess that kind of takes us to do we see anything else when people start getting really upset about the activities in the round room, whatever we'll call that room? It doesn't seem like anyone's really that overtly like, we're going to quit right now. Even though they all have that conversation, they all seem to be kind of back at it again at dinner time. They get their shakes. Jessica asks about whether she's getting dosed or not. They get their next dose. They all seem to be pretty mellow. They're kind of like all in on this, Baba Cannavale's pain seems to be better, right?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe it's a suspension of disbelief thing that we have to do as viewers, or maybe it's that, they've been under the influence of something since almost day one. So maybe all their judgments are a little loosey-goosey at this point. I don't know.
And then that leads to another big development at that last scene, beyond everybody just kind of chilling out together, is that now Delilah confronts Masha.
Yes.
And they have a terrible relationship, by the way. I don't know how they could work together, because Masha is, being very imposing her will on Delilah, telling her she has to take her medication. Like, it's a very intimate thing to tell somebody they have to be medicated to continue to work.
It's a condition of her employment.
That's what I mean. To make that a
That's
condition of employment is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And then telling her also, like, don't make him sleep outside of the house, outside the bedroom anymore, and all that stuff, which is like crazy, right? This is my concern now. I feel like this is going to be a lot more about Masha, and that Masha is, really going to reveal herself to be like kind of a total egomaniac, right? So she is trying to tell people, obviously she's already telling people what they can eat. She's trying to program their emotions. She's trying to tell someone
like
how they should be. Basically like a cult leader, right?
Yeah.
Like basically telling them, like, this is when you can eat, this is how you can eat. These are the meds you take. You have to be medicated to, and this is how you should be in your, sexual relationships and everything. It's like, this is crazy, right? This is a crazy amount of control. And I feel like I've been kind of forgiving up until this point, because I kind of feel like you're signing up to go to one of these retreats. So
right.
There's a certain level of control you giving up, but
that's what you're paying for. Yeah,
exactly. This is like completely outside any bounds, basically, where I'm like, what is she talking about? Like, who would tolerate any of this?
Right. And Delilah's raising concerns, right, about the dosage and whether it's safe or not, and stuff like that. And also, like, she was trying to do it behind Delilah's back, right? She told Glory to increase the dosage without including Delilah in that conversation. So there's a lot of obviously control dynamics between the two of them.
Yeah, and it's crazy because that's another point you bring up there, which I forgot about till this very moment, which is not only are they complaining about everything that's happened up until now, she's now saying to up the dose, right? So
Right.
Delilah is basically saying we shouldn't have transitioned to the second phase period. And now it's like, okay, well, they tolerated it for day one. Let's
Yeah,
up the
full speed
dosage.
ahead.
It's like, okay, well, chill out here. At least tap the
Yeah.
brakes for, you know.
Hmm.
And so this is all a little nuts. And she seems to be more and more demented as we go forward in this show. And I do, like I said, I do worry that the show is about to kind of get a little over the top, but we will see, because overall I like this episode. Oh, and then of course the very last thing is she goes back
Right.
to her
Hmm.
room, and of course the stalker is now closer and closer and closer. And I have to assume the stalker is somehow somebody on the show. It would make no sense to just have some random person show up at some point. So
True.
whoever's been messing with her has got to be some of the buddy within the cast that we've seen. And what does it say on the wall when she
Oh
gets home?
gosh, I was hoping you would have kept tracks. It's good to die, something like this.
It's good to die. That's it. So then Masha returns to her room, and written on the wall is "It's good to die." So whoever's been
Dun
stalking
dun
her,
dun.
yeah, whoever's been doing the stalking is closer than ever.
Mhm.
So yeah, but I have no idea who it is, and I really don't care. That's not what's interesting me in the show. It's not what's
This is probably not the response they wanted from people. Both of us kind of sitting here like, I don't know, somebody's trying to kill her, probably. Yeah.
yeah. Like whatever happens to her at the end of the show, I really don't care. So
It's so
not,
secondary. Yeah.
it's not really the reason I'm watching the
Tell
show.
me more about Francis, though.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so my big concern is this going to be more about Masha now. I don't know how interesting that story is going to be. Although who knows, maybe the character could become more interesting. And like I said, obviously this is Nicole Kidman producing this show herself, so she must want to play this character for some reason. So maybe there is more there, and we have a whole half of the show to go. And that's my second concern, is the kind of scenes I saw here, which I loved. Some of these really big emotional scenes in these characters were the kind of breakthrough scenes I really wanted to see in the show. And they're coming here in the middle of the episode. I mean, the middle of the season. I really worry that the next 4 episodes are going to be a lot of like, who's the stalker, and
Yeah.
and like whatever, like kind of crazy, and they're trying to whatever, like escape the ranch or something, right? And I'm like, man, like if that's going to be 4 scenes of that, 4 episodes of that, I'm not sure I'll make it through to the end of the show, but we'll have to
I
wait and
don't
see.
know. I feel like it's on a good course, and I'd be surprised if it departed so drastically, but I don't know. We'll see.
I'm just not sure what's going to happen next, let's say. But not in a great way. Not like, oh, I can't wait to see what happens next. I'm kind of like, I don't know where you go from here.
I mean, there's still some characters that we have left to learn more about.
Yeah.
So there is that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, Jessica and Ben, who we know very little about, and Lars, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we're going to know more about Lars' backstory, because they, intentionally introduced that
Right.
ex-boyfriend or current boyfriend, whatever that was. So obviously they introduced him for some reason. So I'm sure we're going to get into that backstory as well.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm just looking forward to learning more about those characters that we just talked about. I as we keep saying, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point. I'm more curious to know about Lars's life than I am about Masha's. So,
Right.
So I am hoping that stays at this level, or maybe one step up from it. This whole Masha storyline. I hope we don't get too intensely into that, because I would rather spend the time on the guests at Tranquillum.
Or Tranquillium.
I think I said it was Tranquillium last week, but I think it's Tranquillum. I would rather learn more about these guests, is the point, than about Masha. Although I do like Delilah and Yao quite a bit, though, I will say.
Yeah, I do too. Actually, I like them both,
Yeah.
And they also seem like to be more concerned about the well-being of the people than Masha is. And it is Tranquillum, by the way. So you corrected me last week.
Yes,
and I was right and you were wrong.
Is that right? Sorry about that.
It's okay.
You were right. I was wrong. There you go.
All right. So we have this relatively short episode, I think, so I can go off on my anti-Netflix tirade.
Sure, go for it.
Before we started recording today, I actually was going off on literally considering like quitting Netflix because I feel like Netflix has become a like the streaming service version of Twitter, where they kind of going for some kind of shock value to get a buzz going, so people click through. And appropriately enough, they have a series on right now. It's a mini series, it's only a few episodes. I mean, 8 episodes, I guess, but 8 relatively short episodes. And it's called Clickbait, which is basically what the show is. There are a lot of hot button issues raised in this show. The premise, by the way, Sona, for you to, is a pretty interesting
I
one.
hadn't really heard of it. Yeah.
The premise is pretty interesting in the fact that it is, someone seems to have like kind of an ideal, upper middle class life. The opening scene of the show is basically this family having a birthday party, and there's a fight between a brother and a sister. And the next day, that there is a video on the internet, and the video is of this guy who has like this kind of ideal middle class life, and he is on some like kind of like not like YouTube, but kind of like almost like a 4chan or something, kind of like a darker corner of the internet that's like hosted overseas. And there's a video on there that basically he is holding up a sign that says, "I hurt women." And then it says, "At 5 million views, I die."
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, and it has like 3,000 views at the time. And then of course you see how it starts spinning out. People, start investigating. People start talking about it on the internet. The news starts covering it, and then of course the numbers start ticking up higher and higher and higher. And this is not a spoiler that the numbers get very close to 5 million by the end of episode 1. so that's not like, it's not like the whole movie is a edge of your seat, or series, I should say, edge of your seat. Like, how do we prevent this thing from getting to 5 million? They basically get to 5 million like within a minute of the end of the episode. So, so the show could be very interesting, right? It talks about a lot of hot button issues. And they do occasionally have an interesting idea where they talk about, for example, someone wants to get someone's access to like their dating profile. And they just basically say that they are like Cambridge Analytica, just say like they are, developing an app, and they buy all this, all these profiles from, one of these services that basically just harvest and sell all this stuff, right? Like Facebook, Google, everybody sells your data to other people, to third parties. And then if you go in as a researcher, they basically give you all this stuff without anonymizing it, right? This is what Cambridge Analytica did, right? So anyway, the point is they bring this up. It's a fascinating topic, and they do this in every episode. They bring up something kind of like interesting that's current event in the news, something that's interesting to explore. And they bring it up and they're like, "Yeah, you can do this. Did you know that?" And everyone else in the show is like, "Oh, I didn't know that." Okay, next topic, right? It's like they raise all these things constantly. They don't explore them in any way. And it is a pet peeve of mine that the show basically requires that people behave in a way that is like only the way people behave in TV shows, right? Like there are these very, very powerful moments of people dealing with someone's death, and it is very emotional. The actors do a great job of, in these individual scenes. And the next episode, everybody's just like, "Hey, Mom, I'm gonna go grab some groceries," and they're making jokes in the car and stuff. And I'm like, "Oh, this must be like a month later because they've kind of gotten over this." And then like by the end of the show, you realize that the entire show takes place in 11 days. I'm like, boy, they really moved on pretty quickly. That those two scenes must have been like, in the context of the show, like 16 hours apart. And they seem to have recovered pretty well from everything that's happening. So anyway, it's just ridiculous. And like I said, it seems like, I feel like they're just, it's just a waste of time. It's just a waste of time. And it really irritated me. The other thing I was curious to see if you wanted to talk about was, at the end of last week, by the way, there was a cliffhanger where Sona was saying, "I'm finishing watching something." And even though I didn't include it in the episode, I basically said, "Oh, I want to know what it was," because maybe it was something I would want to watch. And she told me what it was. And I guess you can get into it now if you want to discuss it. But I tried to watch this show, and I'll give you my impressions of it. And they're not all negative, by the way, but if you want to get into it a little bit.
So the show is Cruel Summer. It has 10 episodes, FYI. It's on Hulu, right? I think that's where I watched it. Originally on Freeform, I guess, which is a very young adult type of network.
Yeah.
And this show has a very young adult type of feel. The interesting plot device or setup for the show is that it takes place in 3 consecutive years, 1993, 94, and 95. And the idea is it's showing you what's happening on the same day or right around that same time frame in each of those years. And it jumps back and forth between those. So you'll see, a certain part of a day in 1993, and then a certain part of that day in 1994, and then a certain part of that day in 1995. You can see how everyone's relationships develop over the 3 years. And there's a central mystery, which is about this very popular girl who has gone missing. And at the end of the first, I think it's at the end of the first episode, they find her. And so the story of what happened to her, during that time. So she goes missing in 1993. She's found in 1994. And then in 1995, they're dealing with all of the fallout from everything that happened to her. So I actually really enjoyed this. I do think it does have a very, very young adult feel to it. And there were definitely things that I think, had this been geared more towards adults, would have been explored in more depth and been darker. Although this was a little bit dark, but I think it would have been far darker had it been designed for an adult demographic. But I think there was a lot to like about this show. I think the idea of having those different timeframes over the years is very interesting. It did, full disclosure, make it very hard to keep track of at some time. At first, they were very clear about when they were jumping years, but I guess they expected you to pick up on all the cues pretty soon into this series. And there were definitely times where I would think, oh, this is 95. No, this is 94. Okay. So that did get a little confusing at times, but I like the idea. I like that time period. It's a time period that Vic, you and I were like just entering adulthood, right? And it's a fun time to remember in a nostalgia type of way for me. The fashion, the music, all of that is fun. And I think also, just practically speaking, I think there are a lot of advantages for mystery, suspense, plots, to setting things back then, before smartphones, before the internet was like so easily accessible, all of those things. Although that does end up playing a role here, right? There's so many things where you think, well, if you had a phone, you would just pick it up and Google that or whatever, so you would just call for help. I thought the acting was, on the whole, fairly good. I thought they did some interesting things with the character development of these kids. There were definitely certain characters that I expected to be drawn a certain way, and they surprised me with what they did with them. So yeah, I thought there was a lot to like here, even though the very, very YA spin on it was not the best for me, but I can't blame the show for that, because that's what it presents itself to be. It's, I'm just a grown person watching it. So what are your thoughts, Vic?
Sure. Yeah. So, so originally, when Sona brought this up last week, the reason I tried to watch it was because in another podcast I was listening to, someone had made a similar recommendation, and I really liked the premise. So for a very long time, and I mentioned this to Sona, and I had also mentioned this to my wife because I thought it was a show we could watch together, we might be into. And I'd forgotten about it until Sona brought it up again. So I was like, oh, here's an opportunity for us to try to watch it. I'm not going to disparage the show, to be honest with you, because a lot of this was based on expectations. So the reason I was so interested in the show is that I have, for the longest time, been fascinated with this kind of idea of a story structure where you can kind of see the same characters in different contexts, in different times, and just kind of like have completely different relationships to them, just because they're, the circumstances are different or the knowledge you have of them has changed. So I thought this is utterly fascinating framing device. And that's why I was saying that, this is really about expectations. I had in my mind, given the fact that I've wanted to explore this topic for so long, a very kind of high bar for what this show could have been. And this is where I'm telling you that, I'm not the audience for this. First of all, my expectations. And second of all, once again, that tone of the show, that very YA tone of the show.
It is very, very YA. Yeah.
I literally, you don't understand. I literally watched the first scene of this show and I was like, I think I'm out. It was just one scene in and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's also very female YA too, right? So on
Yeah.
top of the young
Mhm.
adult tone, it's also very female skewed.
So that I was, like I said, almost out in the first scene. And the actress, who I think does sometimes do a good job, was so, and this is not her fault, this is probably the way that it's written and she's directed, was so hard pushing this innocent, naive, nerdy persona in that first scene, especially early on. It was so grating to me that, like I said,
Yeah.
I almost turned the show off immediately.
Yeah.
And then you shift to the time and you see her, and, I think giving a much more less mannered performance as you see her get darker and the show goes forward. And then you saw that jumping in time pretty quickly. So I was like, okay, I'll wait this out. And then, like you mentioned, it's at the end of the first episode where we turn out that, we reveal pretty early on that the missing girl is not dead, that she's still around. And that's revealed in the first episode. So I don't consider that a spoiler if it's in the first episode.
Agree.
Anyway, so that's kind of where it lands. So that was enough of a hook to keep me engaged for episode 2. What started happening in episode 2, and where I kind of bailed on the show, and I did then jump to the finale just to see how things wrapped up. But why I bailed after episode 2 was there was a couple of things that were happening then, and you touched on a few of them. One was the tone was so much in that YA space.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
It was not
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
The second thing was, once again, my expectations. I had set this bar pretty high to see, like, almost like to kind of be food for thought for me for like, oh, how could I finish this story that I've been working on for years by using this as an example? And I was not getting any of that out of that, because watching the show for me was like kind of watching a soapy teen show with flashbacks, but they structured that differently, so it didn't feel like flashbacks. But basically, they're not really doing anything differently. The structure of the show wasn't giving me anything more than I probably would have gotten out of like a traditional flash forward, flashback type structure. And the third part of it was, like you mentioned this also, I just started to get confused with, like, in my mind, I'm literally saying this is 93, this is 94, this is 95.
Yes.
And then sometimes it stops and goes from 93 to 95, from 94 to 95. So I'm like, I couldn't keep track anymore in my mind. And it was too much work for me to keep it in my head. And to be honest with you, I was not engaged with, like,
you do have to be a little invested to care about figuring it out. Yeah.
I had no emotional connection to any of the characters. So it was literally like I was just spending all my time trying to keep the facts in order. And I'm like, I don't know if I wanted to make the effort.
I can understand that. They did try and make some good hairstyle choices with the one character. So
but then I got confused. I didn't even know it was the same character because I was so disinvested that I'm like, is that her? Who is that? I don't even know who that person is.
Yeah, so that would immediately clue you in. But of course, she had to be in the scene in order for you to know that. So.
Exactly. Yeah, if she's not in the scene, I don't know what time frame we're in. So I bailed on it. And the last part of it was that it does, deal with some issues, but I don't think very deeply. And I didn't watch the whole show, so I'm sure they fleshed them out more. But also, that was the last thing, is I did jump to the end to kind of see like what the resolution was. And I kind of guessed from episode 2 kind of the direction the show was going in. And like I mentioned to you when I was texting you about it, I pretty much guessed all the twists that were to come, except for like a big twist, which was, in my mind, and, minor spoilers here for people who've watched this. I'm not going to give away too much, but I just saw enough so Sona knows what I'm talking about. But that basically the person who did witness something turned out to be a different person. I thought that was just a vindictive lie, right? And so I didn't expect that there would actually be a person who was like, the confusion was about another person rather than it just being like, revenge, let's say, right? So that was and that was a twist that I wasn't expecting. But other than that, it pretty much everything.
There is a very big flaw in the plot to me with that, and I don't want to get into it too much because spoilers, but as far as calling out that person who is supposed to witness something, I don't understand her motivation for doing that, because it seemed to just cut her own story apart, right? The missing girl's story apart. So I don't really see why she would have done that to start. And no explanation was ever really given for why she would do that. I mean, I could theorize one about resentment or whatever, but it still seemed like a big risk to take. So that I didn't really understand. That one character, though, is Kevin Smith's daughter.
Yes.
That's a bit of trivia.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that. And then all of a sudden, like, as maybe I was watching the second episode, or maybe even when I saw the final episode, watched it, that at some point in there, I was like, oh, that's Kevin Smith's daughter. Yeah. So
Yeah.
a little bit of trivia there.
But I definitely could see how this would be a difficult sell for a grown man. Although
Yes.
I will say that my husband did watch about half of this with me, and he was into it.
Okay.
So,
I mean,
so
there's
it's
enough
not
to,
without its fans.
yeah. I mean, there is, you know, I mean, like I said, it is, oh, and the last part for me, once again, not for me, is I do have an issue with all these nostalgia shows that have popped up. I tolerated it with Stranger Things, but you know, even that's got a little tedious with all the 80s references. But now I'm really getting tired with, like, you know, everything being said in the 90s. You're absolutely correct that it makes it easier without the cell phones being so prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
But also it just seems to be like a fashion or something. Like, it was one of my big pet peeves with also on Netflix. Once again, another thing I don't like Netflix about. I tried to watch that Fear Street thing, and wow, that was another terrible. I just remembered now. I forgot that one, but that's yet
Lost
another
it out.
terrible, just another terrible Netflix offering recently. And once again, set in the 90s, purely to be set in the 90s, like just the back of another 90s reference point, because that's just what's in right now. So I don't have as much tolerance for that. Not that I mean, I don't think that specifically affected this show. Like I said, it's just yet another bar for me to have to clear.
Yeah, I have not really watched much set in that time period, so there
Yeah.
was some novelty to it for me.
So yeah, for me, like I said, I don't want to disparage the show. I actually think it's pretty well made. So if that sounds interesting to you, like, so for example, if you do like kind of like a teen soap show that kind of has a little more going on, it actually is probably more intelligent than most of those. It's a little more clever than, and you know, structurally it's more clever. I think that it is worthwhile for you. But if you were looking for something kind of like, you know, once again, my own expectations, I was expecting something that would kind of be a little more challenging, a little more mature. And, you know, I was probably just off the mark on expecting this from a show that's on Freeform. So that might be my own mistake, right?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. There is a season 2, apparently, or rather, there will be a season 2, I should say.
Season 2? Like, what are you gonna do in
Need more
season
of
2?
this.
What are you talking about? How could there be any more story?
You know, I will say this is a real tangent at this point, but on this plot device kind of idea, there's a book called One Day,
Mhm.
which is kind of a romance type novel. They might have made a movie of it as well, now that I'm thinking about it, but I've only read the book, so I can't be sure if there's a movie. But that book covers the same day in a certain person's life over, I think, maybe 10 years.
Oh, that was probably something more in line with what I was hoping for. But yeah, I'll probably check out the book rather than the movie if that's the case. But I'd be very curious, because that is a framing device that I find interesting.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's very interesting. And one of the things that I did this year, which I haven't started it yet, though, I need to just get over it and start it. I have a 5-year journal. Have you heard of those?
Oh, no.
So you don't write, it's not like a true journal entry where you've written so much, but it's enough for a few sentences. And then you keep it over 5 years, so that, you know, the next year you can see, like, what were you thinking at this time last year? Or what did you do? Where were you? Whatever.
Mhm.
So I like that, you know, idea a lot of how things progress at like that same point in time, year to year.
That's my 5-year journal is this podcast.
This podcast. Okay.
All right. So I will talk to you next week, and you got lots of TV to watch.
Yes, for sure.
All right, talk to you later.
Okay, talk to you later. Bye.
You